For 10 years, Clarissa believed she had everything a woman could want. A home in a quiet southern neighborhood where the maple trees flamed red in the fall, a husband who opened doors for her and pulled out chairs at dinner parties, and a life that looked, from the outside, like a fairy tale carved into suburban brick and white picket fences. Marcus, her husband, was the kind of man neighbors admired. He worked hard, carried himself with confidence, and always had a smile ready for anyone who passed by. At church, he clasped the pastor's hand firmly, bowed his head in prayer, and never failed to drop a folded check into the collection plate. To Clarissa's friends, she was lucky. To her family, she was blessed. And to herself, well, she thought she was secure. Their photographs lined the walls of their home. Vacations in Florida, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, the two of them clinking champagne glasses on New Year's Eve. In every picture, Marcus had his arm draped protectively around her shoulders, his smile warm, his posture steady. He looked every bit the man she had sworn to love until death. But if you looked closer than Clarissa ever dared to in those first years, you might have noticed the cracks. Marcus's charm had always seemed effortless, but there were shadows in his past that no one in Clarissa's family ever asked about. He was born in a small Louisiana town to a mother who raised him alone. His father had vanished before Marcus was old enough to remember his face. When other boys were learning to throw a football with their dads, Marcus stood at the edge of the schoolyard, pretending not to care. By the time he was a teenager, Marcus had mastered the art of blending in. He was handsome, charismatic, the kind of boy who could talk his way out of trouble with a crooked smile. Teachers loved him. Girls adored him. But those closest to him sometimes caught glimpses of something colder, a detachment, a refusal to let anyone too far past the surface. When Clarissa met him years later at a friend's barbecue, Marcus presented himself as the polished, attentive man every woman dreamed of. He held her gaze a little longer than was polite, listened intently to every word she said, and laughed at her jokes as if she were the most fascinating woman alive. She thought it was love at first sight. What Clarissa didn't know was that Marcus had already perfected his performance long before they met. To him, intimacy was never about connection. It was about control. The fake smiles, the endless charm, the polished exterior, it was all armor. In his 20s, Marcus had experimented with ways to feel powerful, ways to escape the hollowness he carried inside. He discovered he could reinvent himself with props, with illusions, with lies so carefully woven that no one ever tugged hard enough to unravel them. By the time he married Clarissa, the deception wasn't just part of his life, it was his life. Sometimes, late at night when Clarissa had drifted to sleep, Marcus would sit in the living room alone with the TV off, staring into the dark. Memories of his father's absence would creep back, whispering that he would never be enough, never be whole. And in those moments, he convinced himself that the double life he lived wasn't cruelty, it was survival. He told himself he deserved admiration, deserved affection from as many people as he could collect, even if it meant building his marriage on lies. To the outside world, Marcus was flawless. To Clarissa, he was her rock. But deep inside, Marcus was a man running from emptiness, covering it with charm and silicone illusions. And that emptiness, though Clarissa couldn't see it yet, was the crack that would one day split their world wide open. Marcus traveled often for business. He would pack lightly, slip on a pressed shirt and polished shoes, kiss Clarissa on the forehead, and disappear for days. She never questioned it. She told herself he worked hard for them, that long nights and late returns were part of his sacrifice. When he came home, tired but cheerful, he would sweep her into a hug and whisper, "I missed you, baby." And Clarissa, naive and hopeful, believed him. In bed, their intimacy was different, sometimes hurried, sometimes strangely distant. Marcus would dim the lights so low that shadows swallowed the room. If Clarissa ever suggested turning on a lamp, he'd laugh it off. "Come on, girl. You know I like the mood." She thought it was quirky, maybe even romantic. She never pushed. Love, she told herself, meant accepting his habits. On Sundays, they strolled hand in hand through the park, sipping iced coffee, waving to familiar faces. People envied them. The couple who never fought in public, who still held hands after a decade. Clarissa, dressed in soft pastels, leaned into her husband's shoulder, convinced she had found her forever. But sometimes, late at night, She lay awake staring at the ceiling. Marcus slept beside her, back turned, his breathing steady. And in those silent hours, she wondered why she felt so alone. "Do you still love me the way you did when we first met?" she asked one evening, her voice fragile, almost breaking in the darkness. Marcus rolled over, brushed a hand down her arm, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Always," he whispered. "You're my whole world, Clarissa." The reassurance melted her doubts, at least for the moment. She buried her face in his chest, inhaled his cologne, and told herself that every marriage had its quirks. After all, love wasn't about perfection, it was about commitment. What she didn't know was that her entire marriage, the very foundation of her life, was built on a lie so grotesque, so unimaginable, that it would one day shatter her world. But in that moment, she was still blind. She still cooked his favorite gumbo on Tuesdays, still ironed his shirts, still kissed him goodbye at the door each morning. She still believed he was her dream man. The illusion wrapped around her like a warm blanket. It comforted her. It blinded her. And like every perfect picture, it hid the shadows just out of frame. Because the truth, his truth, was already waiting, patient and poisonous, beneath the surface of their perfect marriage. Looking back later, Clarissa realized the signs had always been there, subtle but sharp, like splinters under the skin she had ignored for too long. There were the unexplained receipts she sometimes found in his pants pocket while doing laundry, charges from hotels across town, bars she had never stepped foot in. When she asked about them, Marcus would laugh it off. "Client meetings, babe. You know how it is." And she had nodded, tucking the receipts into the trash, telling herself not to be paranoid. There were smells, too. Faint traces of perfume that weren't hers, mingled with his cologne. She once noticed a smear of lipstick on his shirt collar, but Marcus had turned it into a joke, kissing her quickly and saying, "You're the only woman I come home to." She wanted to believe him, so she did. And then there were the silences. Nights when Marcus would roll over and fall asleep instantly, leaving her staring at the ceiling. Times when his phone buzzed late at night, and he'd step into another room to answer it, speaking in a hushed tone before returning with that same easy smile. Her mother once asked, gently, "Are you happy, sweetheart? You don't look yourself these days." Clarissa had brushed it off, insisting everything was fine, because that's what she believed, or wanted to believe. The truth was, Clarissa had felt the cracks long before she ever saw the box. But she had plastered over them with trust, with faith, with love. Because to admit that something was wrong would mean admitting her perfect marriage was an illusion. She told herself all couples had quirks. That business trips explained the late nights. That mood lighting explained the secrecy in their bedroom. That exhaustion explained the distance in his eyes. But deep down, her instincts whispered otherwise. And though she tried to silence them, the whispers only grew louder, waiting for the day they would erupt into a scream. That day would come soon, on a Saturday afternoon, when Clarissa finally uncovered the truth hidden in the basement. It was a Saturday afternoon when the illusion began to unravel. The sun was bright outside, pouring gold through the curtains, but in the basement, everything was dim and stale. Clarissa had gone down there with a simple intention: to clear out old boxes, maybe donate a few things to the church rummage sale. She tied her hair back, slipped on gloves, and carried down a roll of trash bags. The basement smelled of dust and forgotten memories. Cardboard boxes leaned against one another like tired old men, labels written in Marcus's slanted handwriting, Christmas lights, old coats, tools. Clarissa hummed to herself, moving things aside, until her foot hit something heavy pushed far into the corner. It was a box she had never seen before, metal, not cardboard, with a small padlock glinting dully under the basement light. Her first thought was that it was Marcus's work equipment. He was private about his job, after all. But curiosity pricked at her chest. Why would he keep something locked away down here, where even she couldn't find it? She crouched, tugged the box closer, and felt her pulse quicken. She didn't have the key, but Marcus had always underestimated her attention to detail. Clarissa remembered the spare keys hanging on a ring in his desk drawer upstairs. She hesitated only a moment before running up to fetch them. Her hands trembled as she slid the first key into the lock. It didn't fit. The second one did. With a metallic click, the lock sprang open. The lid creaked as she lifted it, and with it, her life split clean in two. Inside lay a secret she could never have imagined. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Black velvet pouches, plastic bags carefully sealed. And then, lying there shamelessly in the dim light, she saw it. A silicone device, anatomically shaped, unmistakably artificial. A fake penis. Next to it, others, different sizes, different colors, like trophies lined up in obscene pride. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. She staggered back, nearly dropping the lid, her mind spinning so fast she thought she might faint. No, no, this can't be, she whispered, pressing a hand over her mouth. Her heart pounded so violently it hurt. For 10 years, every night they'd shared, every moment of supposed intimacy, it had been this? A lie manufactured in silicone and latex? She reached back into the box, hands shaking, and found more. A stack of envelopes. She tore one open. Inside were printed messages, screenshots Marcus must have saved. Messages between him and strangers. Men, women, sometimes more than one at once. Words of desire, arrangements, photos that burned her eyes. Clarissa dropped the papers, her chest heaving. Tears blurred her vision. The basement felt colder now, the walls pressing in around her. She wanted to scream, but only a dry sob escaped. 10 years, she thought. 10 years of my life. 10 years of believing. 10 years of being blind. Memories came crashing back in cruel fragments. The dim lights in the bedroom. His late nights. His sudden business trips. The times he turned her away with a laugh, claiming he was too tired. Every puzzle piece clicked together now, forming an image too grotesque to deny. She picked up one of the silicone devices and held it in her hand, disgust rising like bile in her throat. This was what her marriage had been built on. Not love, not trust, not flesh and blood, but rubber and deception. Clarissa sank to the cold floor, her back against the wall, the device slipping from her grasp onto the concrete. She wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking as tears streamed down her face. In the silence, her mind filled with questions that cut like glass. Who was he really? Did he ever love me? Was I nothing more than a stage prop in his twisted play? Minutes passed, or hours. She didn't know. The sound of her own breathing was all she heard. Finally, she forced herself to her feet. Her body trembled, but inside, something hardened. She stuffed the envelopes and the device back into the box, closed the lid, and snapped the lock shut. But the truth could never be locked away again. Upstairs, she stood before the mirror in the hallway. Her reflection stared back, pale and haunted. She touched her face, almost not recognizing herself. "You fool," she whispered bitterly. "You loved a ghost." But then another voice rose inside her, stronger, sharper. "No, you were deceived, and he will answer for it." Clarissa wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her sorrow was shifting, crystallizing into something darker. A flame of anger flickered in her chest. She had been humiliated, used, lied to. But she would not be destroyed. When Marcus came home that evening, she greeted him with a smile that masked the storm brewing inside. She cooked his favorite meal, laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he kissed her cheek. He didn't notice the stiffness in her posture or the way her eyes lingered on him just a beat too long. At dinner, she asked lightly, "How was the trip?" "Long," he said, sipping his drink. "But worth it. Closed a deal that'll keep us good for a while." She nodded, pushing peas around her plate, her mind screaming with the images she'd found in that basement. Later, when he reached for her in bed, she hid her flinch behind a soft laugh. "I'm too tired tonight, honey." "Fair enough," he replied, turning over, oblivious. Clarissa lay awake, eyes open in the dark, her heart thudding in her chest. She saw the box in her mind, the devices, the letters. The truth gnawed at her, clawed at her. And in that suffocating darkness, a single thought crystallized into resolve. He has deceived me for 10 years. He thinks I will crumble. But he has no idea who I am. He has no idea what I'm capable of. The discovery had broken her heart, but it had also lit a fire. By morning, she would no longer be the same woman. The next morning, the sun rose as if nothing had changed. Birds chirped in the oak tree outside their window. Marcus whistled in the shower, the same upbeat tune he always hummed before work. To anyone else, the world was ordinary. But to Clarissa, everything felt alien. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a coffee mug she hadn't touched. The steam fogged her glasses, though she hardly noticed. She was replaying the basement discovery over and over, like a film she couldn't turn off. The fake devices, the envelopes, the texts that screamed betrayal. When Marcus walked in, adjusting his tie, he bent down and kissed the top of her head. "Morning, baby. You look tired." Clarissa forced a small smile. "Didn't sleep much. I'll be fine." He didn't press. He never did. He just grabbed his briefcase, winked, and was out the door. The moment it clicked shut behind him, Clarissa exhaled a ragged breath. Her mask slipped. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cool table surface. No more lies, she thought. Not from him, and not from me. That day, she began her quiet campaign. She went back down to the basement and opened the metal box again. This time, she didn't recoil. She studied every detail. She photographed the contents with her phone, zooming in on the silicone devices, the printed text exchanges, the receipts tucked into the envelopes. Each click of the shutter steadied her nerves. She created a folder on a hidden drive, labeling it simply Proof. For hours, she combed through the papers. There were names, dates, addresses, even hotel bookings. Marcus had been meticulous, almost proud of his secret life. Clarissa realized he had never imagined she would find it. At first, she wept again, but soon the tears dried. The grief turned into something sharper, something she could wield. That evening, she cooked dinner like usual, pasta tossed with shrimp and garlic. Marcus came home humming, kissed her cheek, and launched into a story about a client. Clarissa nodded, stirred the pot, and listened as if nothing inside her had changed. But her mind was racing. Every laugh she gave, every nod she offered was calculated. She was no longer a wife. She was a strategist. Over the following weeks, she played her part perfectly. She began visiting a lawyer in secret. A woman named Angela, sharp-eyed and unapologetic, who listened without flinching as Clarissa laid out her story. Angela's office smelled faintly of leather and ink. Files were stacked in neat rows, but her desk was clear. When Clarissa placed the photographs on the desk, Angela raised her brows. "You've been sitting on this for how long?" "A few weeks," Clarissa admitted, her voice husky. "I had to be sure. I had to know it wasn't just in my head." Angela leaned back, folding her hands. "Honey, this isn't in your head. This is a case. And not just for divorce. Depending on how far this deception goes, we could be looking at fraud, misrepresentation, even civil claims. You've got more power here than you realize." Clarissa swallowed, the weight of the words settling over her. Power. It was something she hadn't felt in years. Angela slid a card across the desk. "We'll move carefully, quietly. But when the time comes, we'll hit him where it hurts. His reputation, his money, his freedom, if necessary." For the first time since opening that box, Clarissa felt the faintest flicker of hope. At home, she became a master of disguise. She still laughed at Marcus's jokes, still kissed him goodbye, still warmed his dinner in the oven when he came home late. But behind the scenes, she tracked his movements, copied his emails, saved his receipts. At night, while he slept soundly beside her, she lay awake, eyes open, rehearsing her next steps. The ceiling above her became a canvas for strategy. When do I confront him? How much do I reveal? How do I make sure he can't twist this back on me? Some nights, the anger boiled over. She would slip into the bathroom, lock the door, and stare at her reflection in the mirror. "You let him fool you for 10 years, she whispered to herself. "But no more. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You will end this on your terms." Her face, once soft with trust, now hardened with resolve. One evening, Marcus noticed the shift. "You've been different lately," he said as they sat on the couch, the TV flickering with some sitcom neither of them was really watching. Clarissa forced a small chuckle. "Different how?" "I don't know," he said slowly. "Quieter. Distracted. You're not mad at me, are you?" She turned to him, eyes steady, smile practiced. "Of course not. Just work stress, I guess. Nothing you need to worry about." He accepted it easily, his ego too large to imagine she could see through him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned in, hiding the storm brewing behind her eyes. The silence became her greatest weapon. She never screamed, never accused, never gave him reason to suspect. Instead, she observed. And the more she watched, the more she saw what she had missed all along. The way he checked his phone obsessively. The sudden late meetings that didn't add up. The receipts crumpled in his pockets from restaurants she'd never visited. Each clue fed the file she was building. Each lie he told added fuel to her fire. Yet on the outside, she was the same loyal wife, hosting dinners for friends, smiling at church, sitting quietly beside him at family gatherings. But inside, Clarissa was transforming. She was no longer the woman who asked if he still loved her. She was the woman who would decide when his lies ended. One night, while Marcus slept, she sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning. The file was spread out before her: photographs, receipts, transcripts. She stacked them neatly, pressed them into a manila folder, and wrote his name across the front in bold, black ink. Marcus. She sat back in her chair, staring at it. The folder was more than evidence. It was her weapon, her shield, her rebirth. The clock ticked past midnight. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Clarissa lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and whispered into the stillness. The time will come, and when it does, he'll never see it coming. Her voice was calm now, steady, almost serene. The grief was gone. The fear had burned away. What remained was something stronger, unyielding determination. Clarissa had been a wife, a victim, a fool. But soon, she would be something else entirely. The night of reckoning came cloaked in rain. Thunder rolled low across the sky, rattling the windows of their quiet southern home. Clarissa stood in the kitchen, staring at the clock as its hands crept towards 7. Marcus would be home soon. She had prepared the stage with careful precision. The table cleared, the lights dimmed, and in the center, the metal box and manila folder she had built piece by piece. Her heart pounded, but her face was calm. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, no jewelry. Tonight, there would be no illusions. The front door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket. He looked tired, but cheerful as always. "Smells good in here. What's for dinner?" Clarissa didn't answer. She simply watched as he set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and walked into the kitchen. When he finally noticed the box on the table, his smile faltered. "What's this?" he asked, voice wary. Clarissa's eyes locked on his. "Sit down." Something in her tone stopped him cold. He hesitated, then slowly pulled out a chair and lowered himself into it. His gaze flicked to the box, then back to her. "Clarissa, what is this?" She slid the folder toward him. The letters across the front, his name, written in bold black ink, seemed to scream in the silence. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers. Photographs spilled out, the silicone devices, the receipts, the messages. His face drained of color. Clarissa's voice was low, steady, almost gentle. 10 years, Marcus. 10 years you let me live in your fantasy. 10 years you lied to me, used me, humiliated me. He swallowed hard, stammering. I can explain." She leaned forward, eyes flashing. "Explain what? That our entire marriage was built on plastic? That while I cooked your meals and washed your clothes, you were sneaking around with strangers in hotel rooms?" Marcus slammed the folder shut, anger replacing fear. "You went through my things. You had no right." Clarissa cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. "No right. I'm your wife. I had every right to know who I was sharing my bed with, who I gave my life to. And now I know." The rain hammered harder against the windows. Marcus shoved the folder aside, leaning forward. "Listen to me, Clarissa. You don't understand. It was never about you." Her laughter broke out, cold and bitter. "Never about me? Do you hear yourself? I spent 10 years loving a man who didn't exist. 10 years clinging to shadows while you pretended to be someone you're not. And you tell me it wasn't about me?" Marcus's face twisted. Shame, anger, desperation, all battled for control. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I could keep it separate. I thought." "You thought wrong," Clarissa snapped. Her voice rose for the first time, echoing through the kitchen. "You stole a decade of my life. You lied every single day. Do you even know what that does to a person? To look back and realize it was all a performance." Marcus slammed a hand on the table, rattling the box. "What do you want from me? Do you want me to beg? Do you want me to say I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But it's done. It's in the past. We can move forward." Clarissa stared at him in disbelief. "Move forward." Her voice broke, not with weakness, but with fury. "You think I can just erase what I saw? That I can unknow the truth? No, Marcus. There's no moving forward. Not for us." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The rain outside was relentless, like a drumbeat of judgment. Finally, Marcus's voice softened, almost pleading. "Clarissa, I love you. Whatever I did, those people meant nothing. You're the one I come home to. Doesn't that count for something? She leaned back, folding her arms. Her eyes never left his. Love isn't lies, Marcus. Love isn't built on secrets and silicone. Whatever we had, whatever I thought we had, it died the moment I opened that box. His jaw tightened. The desperation in his eyes hardened into rage. You can't just throw away 10 years. You can't destroy me over this. Clarissa's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't joy. It was resolve. Watch me. She stood, lifted the box, and dropped it back onto the table with a thud. This isn't just evidence of betrayal. It's proof of who you really are. I've made copies, Marcus. The lawyer has them. If you think you can intimidate me into silence, think again. Marcus's face went pale. For the first time, the mask slipped entirely. He realized she wasn't bluffing. You wouldn't, he whispered. Clarissa leaned close, her voice low but lethal. I already did. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's shoulders sagged. He looked at her, really looked at her, as though seeing a stranger. She turned away, her hands steady as she poured herself a glass of water. Her voice carried across the room, calm and final. Our marriage is over. Tomorrow, the papers will be filed, and the world will know who Marcus really is. Marcus buried his face in his hands, muttering curses. But Clarissa didn't flinch. She had already walked through fire. There was nothing left for him to burn. She took a long sip of water, set the glass down, and walked past him without another glance. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step a declaration. She was done being his victim. Behind her, Marcus sat motionless, trapped in the ruins of his deception. Clarissa climbed the stairs, her heart pounding, but lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time, she felt air fill her lungs fully. She had spoken the truth. She had taken back her voice. And though the storm outside raged, inside her, there was a strange and steady calm. Because Marcus might have stolen 10 years. But tonight, Clarissa had stolen back her power. The morning after their confrontation, the house felt like a tomb. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, hair disheveled, a mug of coffee cooling untouched before him. He hadn't slept. Clarissa could see it in the red rims of his eyes, the twitch of his jaw. She didn't speak to him. She moved through the kitchen with calm precision, placing her travel mug under the coffee pot, slipping her keys into her purse. When she finally turned to him, her voice was steady. The lawyer will be in touch today. You'll be served before the week is over. Marcus's lips parted as though he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Clarissa left before he could gather his words. The slam of the door was like a gavel. Within days, the first papers were filed. Marcus was officially served while leaving his office, a manila envelope pressed into his chest by a process server who spoke his name loud enough for half the building to hear. Colleagues looked on, whispers following him through the glass doors. By the time he reached his car, his phone was buzzing with texts from coworkers. What's going on, Marcus? Is this true? The facade of his carefully curated life began to fracture. Clarissa, meanwhile, stayed composed. She worked with Angela, her lawyer, to build an airtight case. The photographs, the receipts, the messages, all cataloged, all organized into neat binders. Every time Angela flipped through the pages, she shook her head in disbelief. He thought he was untouchable, Angela muttered. But we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what he is. Clarissa nodded, her face calm, though inside she felt a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger still simmered, yes, but there was also relief, sweet, intoxicating relief, that the truth was no longer locked in a basement box. The gossip spread quickly. Small towns had long memories and quick tongues. At the grocery store, Clarissa caught the sideways glances, the hushed whispers. That's her, you know. The one whose husband. The words trailed off, but the pitying look said enough. Yet Clarissa didn't cower. She walked taller. She met their eyes. Because this time, she wasn't the fool in the dark. Marcus was. At his workplace, Marcus's downfall accelerated. Clients canceled meetings. His boss called him into the office and asked pointed questions he couldn't answer. Someone leaked the documents Angela had prepared, details of his affairs, the evidence of deception, and suddenly Marcus's name was smeared across local gossip columns. By Friday, he was put on indefinite leave. When the first court hearing came, the air in the small courthouse was thick with anticipation. Reporters had caught wind of the scandal. and their cameras clicked as Clarissa walked up the steps in a tailored navy dress. She looked poised, unshaken, her chin lifted high. Inside, Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his suit wrinkled, his tie crooked. He looked nothing like the man neighbors once envied. Angela rose first, addressing the judge with controlled fire. "Your Honor, this is not a simple divorce. This is 10 years of calculated deceit, of fraud, of humiliation inflicted on my client under the guise of marriage." She laid out the photographs, the receipts, the messages. Each piece landed on the table like a hammer blow. The courtroom murmured. Marcus shrank lower in his seat. When it was his turn to speak, his voice cracked. I never meant to hurt her. I was confused. I thought I could keep my worlds separate." The judge's expression remained stony. "Mr. Williams, this court is not concerned with your confusion. It is concerned with the pattern of deception you inflicted on your wife. 10 years of it." Clarissa watched silently, her face unreadable. But inside, she felt vindicated. For once, Marcus wasn't in control. Outside the courthouse, microphones thrust toward her. "Clarissa, do you have any comment? What do you want the public to know?" She paused on the steps, the wind tugging at her hair, and spoke clearly. "I want people to know that lies can shatter lives. But truth is the only path to freedom. I was deceived for 10 years. I won't be silent anymore." The clip aired on local news that evening, her calm voice resonating across the county. To some, she was a woman scorned. To others, she was a symbol of strength. For Marcus, it was the final blow. His phone stopped ringing. Friends disappeared. Even his own family distanced themselves, embarrassed by the scandal. Alone in his apartment, Clarissa had already locked him out of the house. He stared at the walls, muttering curses, drowning in the ruin of the empire he thought he'd built. Clarissa, meanwhile, was rebuilding. She redecorated the house, stripping it of his presence. She repainted the living room, replaced their wedding photos with landscapes and family portraits. Each brushstroke, each new frame, was a declaration: "This is my life now. Mine." At night, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened, the grief, the betrayal, the rage. But instead of drowning in it, she let it fuel her. She journaled, she prayed, she walked miles through the neighborhood until her legs ached. And little by little, the broken pieces of her life began to take shape again. The final hearing came months later. The divorce was granted, the assets divided. Marcus tried to fight, but his credibility was shredded. Clarissa was awarded the house, the savings account, and most importantly, her freedom. As the gavel struck, Clarissa closed her eyes and exhaled. It was over. Outside, Marcus approached her, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. "Clarissa, please, don't do this. We can fix it. I still love you." She turned to him, her gaze steady, her voice firm. "Love isn't built on lies, Marcus. Whatever you think you feel, it's not love. Not anymore." And with that, she walked away, her heels clicking against the courthouse steps, each step a punctuation marked to the end of their story. Marcus had fallen. The man once admired, respected, envied, reduced to a shadow of himself. And Clarissa? She had emerged from the wreckage not as a victim, but as something far stronger, a woman who had stared down deception and chosen truth. The storm had passed, but her rebirth was just beginning. The divorce decree was barely dry when Clarissa found herself standing in front of cameras. It wasn't what she had planned, not at first. She had thought she would retreat, heal quietly, fade back into normal life. But the story refused to stay small. By the time the second hearing ended, whispers had become headlines. Wife discovers husband's 10-year deception. Local papers devoured it. Online forums dissected it. And soon, television stations wanted the woman at the center to speak for herself. Clarissa resisted at first. She didn't want to relive the nightmare, didn't want to put her wounds on display. But Angela, her lawyer, leaned across her office desk one afternoon, eyes sharp. "You don't have to stay silent, Clarissa." He controlled the narrative for a decade. "This is your chance to take it back. Tell your story on your terms." Clarissa sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I won't be his victim in private anymore. If he wanted to humiliate me with lies, I'll destroy him with truth." The day of the interview arrived. Clarissa dressed simply, no frills, no dramatics. A navy blazer, a white blouse, her hair pulled back. She wanted people to see her, not a spectacle. The studio lights were blinding. but she sat tall in the chair opposite the anchor. The cameras rolled, and the first question came like a bullet. "Clarissa, can you tell us what you discovered about your husband?" Her throat tightened, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I discovered that my marriage was a lie. For 10 years, the man I trusted used deception to control me. I believed in him. I believed in us. And I found out the entire foundation was built on secrets." The anchor leaned forward. "What went through your mind when you first realized the truth?" Clarissa swallowed hard. Shock, anger, shame, but most of all, grief. It felt like a death, not of a person, but of 10 years of my life. I mourned the life I thought I had, the man I thought I knew. The studio was silent. Even the crew seemed frozen, hanging on her words. Then came the question that would define her. Why speak out now? Why not keep this private? Clarissa's eyes glistened, but her voice was clear. Because silence is what allowed the lie to grow. I don't want any woman, or man, to live in the dark the way I did. If telling my story means someone else finds the courage to open their eyes, then it's worth it. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice when someone has stolen it from you. The anchor nodded solemnly. Clarissa, thank you for your honesty. You've given a lot of people strength tonight. By the next morning, the clip had gone viral. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Hashtag Clarissa's truth. Hashtag 10 years of lies. Hashtag reclaim your voice. Strangers sent messages of support. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, of secrets uncovered, of years lost. Clarissa read them late into the night, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the first time, her pain didn't feel isolating. It felt communal. But for Marcus, the fallout was devastating. His name trended for all the wrong reasons. Memes mocked him. Old flames came forward with their own stories. Employers distanced themselves. He was toxic, untouchable. He called Clarissa one night, his voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? You've ruined me. She held the phone to her ear, silent for a long moment before answering. No, Marcus. You ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light. Then she hung up. The public began to see Clarissa not just as a wronged wife, but as a survivor, a truth teller. Churches invited her to speak at women's groups. Nonprofits asked her to attend events about resilience and healing. Each time, she hesitated. She wasn't a preacher or a professional speaker. She was just a woman who had been broken and rebuilt. But every time she stood before a crowd, looking into the faces of women who carried their own secrets, she found her voice. Betrayal doesn't define you, she said one evening to a packed church hall. What defines you is what you do after. You can choose silence, or you can choose truth. And truth will always set you free. The applause thundered. Clarissa stood at the podium, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years, pride. Still, nights were difficult. Alone in her bed, she sometimes reached for the empty space where Marcus used to sleep. The grief was still there, curling around her in quiet moments. But now it was softer. It no longer controlled her. One evening, Angela called. The case is over. The settlement's finalized. You've come through it, Clarissa. How do you feel? Clarissa gazed out her window, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold. I feel free. For the first time in 10 years, I feel free. Marcus, meanwhile, descended into obscurity. Former colleagues avoided him. Friends deleted his number. Even his family turned their backs, unable to face the humiliation. Alone in a dingy apartment, he scrolled through headlines that tore his name apart. Each one reminded him of the empire he'd lost. He had once believed he was invincible, untouchable. Now he was a cautionary tale. For Clarissa, the public revelation wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. She hadn't just exposed Marcus. She had unshackled herself. And as she stood one afternoon on the courthouse steps, reporters' cameras flashing, she raised her head high. This isn't the end of my story, she told them. This is the beginning. The words echoed long after the microphones were lowered, long after the cameras switched off. They echoed in the hearts of those who heard them, in the lives of women who decided to search for their own truths. Clarissa had lived a decade in lies. But now, her truth was louder than the storm that once tried to drown her. Months had passed since the final hearing, but for Clarissa, life no longer felt measured by court dates or news cycles. Time now stretched in quieter rhythms. Morning walks with coffee in hand, evenings reading novels by lamplight, weekends spent with family she had once neglected in her devotion to Marcus's facade. One crisp autumn morning, she stood at the edge of the ocean, toes sinking into cool sand. The waves rolled in with steady persistence, erasing footprints as quickly as they appeared. She inhaled deeply, letting the salt air fill her lungs. For the first time in years, her chest didn't feel heavy. This is mine, she thought. This freedom, this breath, this life. She had lost 10 years, yes. 10 years bound in a marriage of shadows. But she had gained something Marcus could never take from her, clarity. Her community had changed too. No longer did neighbors whisper pityingly behind her back. They greeted her warmly, sometimes with admiration in their eyes. At church, women approached her quietly after service. "You gave me courage," one said, voice trembling. "I finally left my husband after 20 years of lies." Another hugged her tightly. "You reminded me I'm stronger than I thought." Clarissa accepted their gratitude with humility, but inside, she marveled at the ripple effect. She had thought her story was one of personal ruin. Instead, it had become a beacon. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some nights, loneliness crept in, curling cold fingers around her heart. She missed the idea of companionship, the warmth of another presence in the house, the simple routine of two people sharing space. But she no longer missed Marcus. She missed the dream of what she thought they had, the illusion of love she had clung to. And with each passing day, even that ache dulled. One evening, as she packed away the last box of Marcus's belongings she had kept for legal reasons, she paused. Inside was their wedding photo, her in white lace, him in a sharp suit, both smiling wide. She studied the image for a long time, then whispered, "Rest in peace." Not to Marcus, who still lived in his lonely apartment, but to the woman she had been on that day, the woman who believed in fairy tales without question. She slid the photo back into the box, sealed it shut, and carried it to the curb. The garbage truck would come in the morning, and with it, one more piece of her old life would be gone. By winter, Clarissa had carved out new routines. She joined a book club, signed up for yoga classes, and began volunteering at a local shelter. She found joy in small acts, helping a young mother sort donated clothes, laughing over coffee with new friends, planting tulips in her front yard. But her rebirth wasn't only personal, it was professional. For years, Clarissa had worked quietly at a small insurance office, content to type reports and answer phones while Marcus played the role of the ambitious husband. She had kept her head down, convincing herself her job didn't matter, that her role was simply to support him. Now, everything felt different. One morning, she walked into her manager's office with a portfolio of projects she had secretly taken on during the chaos of her divorce. She spoke with confidence, outlining improvements she had implemented, ways to streamline claims, ways to help customers more quickly. Her manager listened, surprised by her assertiveness. "Clarissa, I had no idea you were doing all this," he said. She met his gaze steadily. "That's because I never asked for credit before. But I'm asking now." By spring, she was promoted to supervisor. Colleagues who once overlooked her now sought her advice. For the first time, Clarissa felt not just useful, but powerful in her own right. At church, too, she noticed the shift. Instead of quietly slipping into the pew, she began leading small groups, counseling women who confided their own struggles. Some had endured affairs, others financial deception, still others the subtle erosion of trust. Clarissa didn't claim to have all the answers, but she offered her story, and with it, proof that survival was possible. One Sunday, a young woman clutched her hand after service. "If you hadn't spoken out, I would still be trapped. You saved me." Clarissa squeezed her hand gently, humbled. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." She realized then that her life had taken on a new purpose. It wasn't just about surviving Marcus's lies. It was about turning her pain into a lantern for others. In her garden, where tulips bloomed bright against the dark soil, she often thought of the woman she used to be, the wife who asked softly in the night, "Do you still love me the way you did when we first met?" That woman had been silenced by fear, by lies, by doubt. Now Clarissa spoke loudly. She asked for what she deserved. She built a life not from shadows, but from truth. And perhaps most importantly, she learned to love herself without needing permission from anyone else. Her lawyer, Angela, remained a friend. One evening over dinner, Angela raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. Clarissa smiled, clinking glasses. To truth, she replied. Meanwhile, Marcus faded further from relevance. Word around town was that he had moved to another city, chasing jobs that never panned out. Some said he drank too much, others that he spent his nights alone, scrolling through the wreckage of his reputation online. Clarissa didn't ask, didn't care. His story was no longer hers to carry. Spring brought fresh blossoms, and with them, a sense of renewal. Clarissa stood in her garden one morning, dirt on her hands, sun on her face. She thought about the woman who had once stared into the mirror with tears streaking her cheeks, whispering that she had been a fool. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, unafraid of the truth. She had been deceived, yes, but she had refused to let deception define her. The public still remembered her, though the frenzy had quieted. When she was invited to speak at a women's conference in the city, she hesitated, then agreed. Standing on that stage, facing hundreds of faces, she told her story, not with bitterness, but with strength. 10 years ago, I thought love meant silence. I thought trust meant ignoring my instincts. But love isn't silence, and trust isn't blindness. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your worth is never defined by someone else's lies. The applause shook the room. Clarissa walked off the stage with tears in her eyes, but this time, they weren't born of grief. They were born of triumph. On the anniversary of the day she discovered the box in the basement, Clarissa returned to the ocean. She walked barefoot along the shore, carrying a single piece of paper folded in her hand. Written on it were the words, "He stole my past, but not my future." She knelt in the sand, dug a small hole, and buried the note. The tide would claim it soon, carrying it out into the vastness of the sea. As she stood, the wind lifted her hair, the horizon glowing with the pink of sunrise. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I am free." Clarissa's story had begun with betrayal, with lies hidden in the shadows of a basement. But it ended here, in light, in freedom, in the steady rhythm of waves that promised new beginnings. She turned her back on the ocean, walking toward the life that awaited her. Her steps were firm, her heart unburdened, because Marcus may have deceived her for 10 years. But Clarissa had won something far greater, herself.